The good news is we can start. The bad news is that we don't have any Wi-Fi. So I'm afraid parts will have to manage without Wi-Fi for the moment. We're hoping to be able to fix that after lunch when someone is coming in from the club to look at what's happened to the Wi-Fi. If anyone feels that puts them at a great disadvantage, we'll just have to think about how to deal with that. But hopefully we can proceed without Wi-Fi. There's a couple of other things. Mr. Salt has asked if everyone could, when they're speaking into the microphone, if they could speak about 4 inches away from the microphone, just so everyone can hear. There's quite a lot of people in the room today. So if you generally, counsel, speak to, or advocates speak to me, so if you have your microphone sitting between me and you, then you'll naturally speak into the microphone, and a bit closer, perhaps. Okay. The other thing, Mr. Spears has asked me to tell you not to pick up the microphone by the neck. Just pick it up by the base, because if you pick it up by the neck, the microphones will break, and they're just new. Okay. There was a couple of other things I wanted to mention before we get into the evidence. So the first thing is, just in terms of tonight, the community session, that's going to be held tonight, starting at 6:30 and running till 9 p.m. And I've asked people who want to take part and speak to give notice, and a number of people have given me notice and have given me notice of what they're going to say. And I'm afraid that we don't have resources to film that session, to webcast that session. However, Mr. Tor Klein, who is a member of the Skye Wind Farm Information Group, has asked if he may film it. And I've said that I don't have an objection in principle to that, subject to a couple of reservations. First, I've said that he would require consent of other people at the meeting. And I'm sorry, Mr. Klein, I started without you. That's I should have waited for you. Second, I've stipulated that if the recording is made public, it's made public as a whole and not clipped. If established news services like West Highland Free Press or a terrestrial TV channel want to use a clip that they've chosen from the whole, I don't personally have a problem with that. But I don't know, I just wanted to check if anyone else has anything to raise about that at this stage. What I'll do is I'll ask Mr. Klein to speak about it at the beginning of that session, just to make sure everyone's content with what he's proposing to do. But does anyone have anything to raise about that just now?
So, sorry, it would be helpful if before this evening Mr. Klein could give an indication what he's going to make use of the clip for. You indicated in your opening comments that it was primarily in relation to the press and briefing the press. If you could just confirm, he doesn't need to do it over the inquiry floor. He can speak to an instructing solicitor and confirm his purpose.
Are you content to do that tonight, or
preferably today, so that we have advance.
If Mr. Klein wants to, what Mr. Klein has told me that he would like to use it for public and archival purposes, is essentially to make the recording public. But if you want to say anything more about that, Mr. Klein, if you can get access to a microphone.
Yeah, sure. It's for archival and journalistic purposes. That's the main reason for filming it.
Good. Okay. Thank you. The next thing is site inspection. I have not put a site inspection down, an accompanied site inspection down in the programme for this week, simply because there didn't appear to me to be time in this week, given how busy the programme is. I've already carried out my own site inspection using the helpful advice I was given by the parties, and I'll return again to carry out further site inspection in light of the evidence that I've received at this inquiry. But does anyone have any strong views as to whether there should be an accompanied site inspection as well?
If I may, I'm sorry, were you going to speak first? I don't have strong views. It would be quite helpful to know where you've been, though. I'm imagining you haven't climbed to the top of every Cullen and every viewpoint, which some of which are quite high up. But it'd be quite helpful to have an indication of where you have been so that we can fill any gaps that we perceive to exist.
Well, should I just set that out in writing, and
If
then
you didn't mind, yes.
and
please.
then I'll set out in writing where I am going subsequently. I have to say I haven't been up Hill of Aldvore because there was a pool on the access path, and I felt it was more prudent to go and see something else that day. So just moving on to landscape and visual evidence, generally speaking, witnesses' precognitions should not be more than 2,000 words long, and I gave express permission for the applicant's landscape and visual witness to go beyond the 2,000 word limit in her precognition if it was necessary for her to address the issue of the crofting landscape as a special quality of the North West Skye special landscape area, which had been a matter raised by the council in evidence. Ms Anderson's precognition is rather over 3,500 words. I wasn't completely convinced that every single word over the 2,000 word limit was required to address the crofting landscape issue alone. And given the length of the precognition, it would take a significant time at the inquiry to read out. So what I've proposed, therefore, is that Mr Anderson should not read out a precognition, but that we should simply move to evidence in chief on landscape matters. Is that satisfactory?
Yes, thank you, sir. That was relayed to me about his satisfactory.
Okay, does anyone have anything else to raise before we commence evidence in the inquiry? Mr Finlay.
Yes, so just 2 points. To respond to your points on conditions, my understanding is the processes between the ECDU and councils have changed so that Highland Council is only expected to contribute on conditions that it has an interest in. So such as the NATS condition is not a matter that it is necessarily interested in. Obviously, that's a matter we're happy to liaise with Mr Gillies on or whatever, but insofar as there are missing conditions, that's primarily between ECDU and the applicant, unless they're conditions which Highland Council has a particular interest in. So that is a change of process, certainly from my understanding. So I just thought I should make you aware of that. As to the particular documents you were supplied with, there's been a travelling draft between the parties. The most recent edition of it you haven't been copied into, but that would explain the provenance of the two case law and the report that you referred to. We've agreed to further, we're waiting back comments from the applicant on that version of the travelling draft. It's just to say where we are. I'm not making a point as to where we are, and we're hoping to discuss that further this evening, if not tomorrow. So progress is being made on that. So the third matter is we noticed, or I noticed over the weekend, that one of the core documents didn't have the correct enclosure in it. I think it's CD 12.6. And we circulated a copy of the correct version to parties and yourself, which you may not yet have received. I will come to that in due course, but it's a document that I think the witness is familiar with, because I think it's a document I put to at a previous inquiry a few months ago, and it's referred to, CD 14.9, and it's referred to in, there's an extract from it in Mr Fitzpatrick's report at 3.6 is where he refers to it, and the extract from which he's put in footnote 1 on page 5 is very clearly not from the document that had got into onto the website and into the news. So I hope that doesn't cause parties a concern. Given the lack of Wi-Fi at the moment, we're not going to be able to send you, or you won't be able to pick up the document. I'm told that it was circulated to parties, I think, late last night. So just across that bridge when we come to it, but I hope it's not going to cause a problem.
Okay.
There is a matter I'd like to...
Oh, yes,
Sorry.
Mr.
I think you're aware that in the transportation hearing session, an issue is raised by my clients as to the use of the pier at Kyler Block House. Those instructing me have made inquiries of the harbour master at Kyle and received a written response from him. I'd like to show this to the applicants, obviously, before showing it to you, but I don't imagine this is controversial, and in due course I would like to lodge it as an additional document. It's just an email.
That's noted. You'll show it to the applicants first then, yeah?
Indeed, I will.
Okay. Ms. Wilson.
Thank you. So there's only one matter that I want to raise, and that is in relation to the new production that Mr. Finlay referred to, which is a letter now from Nature Scott. I think it's actually CD 14.6.
Yes.
And the applicant doesn't object to that.
No objection.
I'm grateful.
Great. Well, in that case, I think we can, if no one else has anything else, I think we can commence. Mrs. Wilson.
Thank you, sir. My first witness, as you're aware, is Ms. Kelly Anderson, who's giving evidence on behalf of the applicant in relation to landscape and visual impact evidence. She's lodged an inquiry report and, as you previously noted, a precognition. I don't propose to take her to either of those documents, but I do have some supplementary questions in evidence in chief. Good morning, Miss Anderson.
Good morning.
Do you have your inquiry report and your precognition in front of you?
Just get it. Yes.
If I could ask you some of the questions that I have in relation to methodology.
Yes.
There's a dispute, in summary, between yourself and Mr. Fitzpatrick in terms of the use of comparative versus restored, and separately additional and combined cumulative effects. Would you describe that as a difference of opinion on methodology?
No, not necessarily a difference in opinion. We have carried out an assessment of both the comparative and the restored baseline. So the comparative was very similar to the LVI methodology, and in that way we assume that the operational Ben-Aketil is present in the landscape as it currently is, whereas the restored baseline is where we assume that Ben-Aketil has been fully restored and therefore isn't present in the baseline. And I believe Mr. Fitzpatrick he's actually done an assessment. He has considered both, but he has focused mainly on the restored. Whereas Mr. Daly has done something a little bit different, and that is he's done a slightly different type of comparative assessment.
And how would you describe that?
So as I've read Mr. Daly's inquiry report, he has considered the restored baseline only, and then for the comparative, he's considered the effects of the operational Aketil as it currently stands, and then he compares the difference between the two. So it's a slightly different type of comparative, so not directly equivalent.
And is that an issue that guidance is provided by Nature Scott on?
I believe Mr. Daly has referenced an earlier draft guidance, but the approach that myself and indeed Mr. Fitzpatrick and equally Miss Platt have considered is the approach that's suggested by Nature Scott in their most recent pre-application advice. That was dated November 2024, which is after the application, after the EIA, but again we included in the additional information in March.
And if you could have that in front of you, please. I think it's CD 6.2. I think it was August 2024 that it was published.
Sure, it's CD 6.2, I think, is the amendments to the GLVIA. So it'd be a different CD number, I think.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Is that 612, I think, was that general advice? Is that what you wanted me to get out, or...
If you could, in the first instance, look at CD 6.2 and advise
Yes.
whether that is the document that you're referring to, or if you're intending to refer, as Mr. Finlay indicated, to CD 12. I think we can... Are you looking at CD 6.2?
Yes, I am looking at that, yes. To some degree, yes. So with regard to the difference between additional and combined effects, yes, I've referred to both GLVIA 3, but I have noted that in the relatively recent Landscape Institute technical guidance note, which adds some notes and clarifications with regard to GLVIA 3, which again was published relatively recently in only August of 2024, yes, with regard to the additional and combined effects in the cumulative, yes, I've carried out my additional and so my cumulative assessment, where I use the words both additional and total combined, they are as defined in CD 6.2, which is that clarification note document. And I note that that is slightly different from how others, other witnesses and other evidence has used the word additional. So as I've read through the evidence, I have noticed that often when other witnesses or other evidence, they use the word additional to mean additional significant effects to those assessed by the applicant, by myself. So again, there's a little bit of confusion, but certainly when I use the words either additional or total combined, they are as discussed in that technical guidance note clarification. And again, that is specifically, so if you were to look to page 19 of that document, 7.3.
Ms. Anderson, can I ask you just to slow down a little bit, please? You're going quite quickly. Sorry, what page?
So page 19 of the notes and clarifications. And on that, 7.3 specifically addresses the issues of additional or combined effects. And in that document, it defines what additional cumulative effects are. Would you like me to read that out, or?
Yes, if you could just give me a minute to get it. Right, if you could point out the passage that is relevant.
Yeah. So additional cumulative effects are defined in GLVIA 3 at paragraph 710 as the additional effects of the project in conjunction with other developments of the same type. This is typically assessed as the effect arising from the proposed development when considered against a baseline containing the other developments in the scenario being considered, i.e. what the effect of adding the project under consideration would be if development X were already built. An additional cumulative effect may be the same as the effect of the development being assessed as recorded in the LVIA, or it may be different. An example of where an additional cumulative effect may be different is where the development being assessed would be seen behind another cumulative development. In this situation, the effect of the proposed development may be less than the effect of the proposed development alone. Combined, also referred to as total, cumulative effects are defined in paragraph 7.18 of GLVIA 3 as the combined effects of all past, present and future developments together with the new project. Typically, a combined cumulative assessment would consider the addition of all unbuilt schemes, including the proposed development, to the existing baseline, rather than a combined effect of all past, present and future schemes against a bare landscape. Both additional and combined cumulative effects may be relevant to consider, acknowledging that the assessor will not have assessed the other schemes and cannot therefore be fully informed judgment on the combined effects, as pointed out in paragraph 718 of GLVIA 3. Typically, a combined cumulative assessment is only relevant where a decision maker is likely to need to consider proposed developments together. For instance, a conjoined appeal or applications likely to be decided at the same planning committee session. In other situations, the additional cumulative effects assessment will provide the information needed to understand the effects if another application has been recently consented.
Thank you. Now, just for clarity, having reviewed the evidence firstly of Mr. Daly, what is your understanding as to how he uses both combined and restored? Sorry, combined and additional.
I think I think sometimes when he says additional, I think he means impacts additional to those that have been assessed by the applicant, and sometimes it is additional in the sense of the cumulative methodology.
And so far as Mr. Fitzpatrick is concerned, how did you analyse his use of the two phrases?
Again, he does, I believe, use additional and combined. But again, it can be confusing at times just to be exactly, to understand exactly what he's meaning, whether it's the additional or the combined.
And this is guidance from the Landscape Institute.
Yes, that's correct.
Very recent, as you advise. What's Nature Scott's position in terms of its guidance?
It hasn't changed for some time, and again, it recommends doing an assessment based on the additional.
So far as Mr. Fitzpatrick is concerned, I think this is a matter he addresses specifically in Table 3.1 of his inquiry report. Do you have that?
Yes, I do.
And if you could turn to paragraph 5.8.
You can just remind me of the number of Mr. Fitzpatrick's report.
Sorry. Do you mean 3.8? Oh, good, I don't think he has a 5.8. Yes, so here, Mr. Fitzpatrick includes a table of the visual impacts as he has assessed them in his inquiry report. And I don't know, does everyone have that? It's page, it's hard copy, page 5.
So what specifically did you want to clarify?
So here, Mr. Fitzpatrick says that table 3.1, which is the one that starts on page 5, below compares the company's view of scale of change resulting from the development as a singular development based on a comparative baseline at each of the viewpoints as provided in the EIA and updated through the FEI against my own judgment. And when I've reviewed this table, where Mr. Fitzpatrick has indicated the company's assessment of scale of change, I can confirm that that is what was included in the LVI, but not necessarily what's been updated in the FEI. And again, I'm not hugely surprised by that, because in the updated additional information 2, which is the one in March, I did not include the sub-judgments of magnitude of scale. I just included the magnitude of change. So really just to sort of make the reporter aware that those assessments were the ones that were from the LVIA rather than the more updated judgments of the additional information. And again, the reason why I stuck with magnitude of change was because the assessments were getting very complex, and I thought it was easier just to try and make it a bit more manageable, not to include all of the sub-judgments, but just to stick to magnitude of change and sensitivity, given that we were already including a comparative and a restored assessment. So I was just trying to keep it a little bit more manageable for everyone, but really just to point that out. And again, I guess on that point on methodology, it might be worth just, again, I do appreciate that, I'm sure Mr. Fitzpatrick, Mr. Finlay will get to this, but in terms of methodology, I thought it might be worth just explaining the difference. And it might be worth actually getting out GLVIA 3. If we had a look at figure...
So that's CD 6.1.
6.1, yes, and figure 3.5. And I believe that's on page 39.
That's assessing the significance of effects.
Yes, it's at the beginning, and it applies to both landscape and visual effects. And it's a table, really. We all like pictures. So if you've got that to hand. Yep. So really, I just wanted to bring that to the reporter's mind, that this kind of very broadly sets out the sort of LBI methodology. And what you can see there is for each receptor identified, we consider and assess the size and scale of effect, the duration, the reversibility, and also the geographic extent. And those are the components that make up magnitude of change. And so really, I just was pulling back in order to sort of simplify the assessment in additional information too. I just didn't provide the full level of detail, again, just because of the sheer complexity. And so I just stuck with the magnitude of effect or magnitude of change and sensitivity of receptor. But I thought it was just worth sort of understanding where the terminology comes from that we've used in our LVIA. And again, just just a sort of, again, a point of reference and information when, again, reading both the inquiry reports and the LVIA.
Thank you.
Sorry, one more thing that I just, if that's okay. Again, just to point out that in this table, again, the notes and guidance on methodology, there is an errata that was incorporated into that document. It's errata number 4 on page 2 of the technical guidance notes and clarifications. And it notes that geographical extent should have been included alongside of size and scale of effect, duration and reversibility in that figure. So again, just a minor error in GLVIA 3 that's been corrected.
I think the list of errata for the additional information 2 is an appendix to that document. Is that correct? There's a sort of schedule of, or table of...
No, so in the Landscape Institute technical guidance note that was published in August 2024, it brought together all of the historic errata and amendments into one combined document. And again, that errata, noting that change to GLVIA 3 was on the, page 2 is errata, so, or page 2 is errata of the notes and clarifications document.
I've misunderstood you that you were, because you have your own schedule of errata.
Yes, it's not my errata. Right. I corrected that for GLVIA.
Another difference of opinion between yourself and the council witnesses relates to treating Loch Breakerdale as a seascape unit.
Yes, that's correct. As I've stated in my inquiry report, I've not assessed Loch Breakerdale as a separate seascape unit, as Mr. Daly has. Again, I have assessed it as a regional scale coastal landscape as part of the Northwest Sky SLA assessment, which is in section 9, sub-area Loch Breakerdale of my inquiry report. Mr. Daly refers to the NatureScot consultation response, but I note that there's little reference to the SLA in that consultation response, which Loch Breakerdale forms part of. And when I reviewed the NatureScot consultation response regarding both the physical and the perceptual characteristics they list for Loch Breakerdale, and I note that these are very well covered within the assessment of Highland SLAs in their description for the Northwest Sky, which covers Loch Breakerdale. So I felt that it was adequately covered in that assessment. I also note that the assessment of Loch Breakerdale as a separate seascape unit, outside of reference to the SLA, was not requested at scoping, nor was it mentioned in either report of handling from the council, nor was it in the consultation response by the council's landscape architect, in-house landscape officer, and it wasn't mentioned by Ms. Platt in her LVIA review. So whilst I do agree that the effect on Loch Breakerdale is a relevant consideration for the reporter and the determination of the application, I feel that the effects on Loch Breakerdale as a regionally important seascape are adequately covered in the assessment that we have as part of the Northwest Sky SLA.
Thank you. Another issue that's arisen in relation to Loch Breakerdale, again from Mr. Daly's evidence and his inquiry report, relates to the question of setback.
Yes. Again, whilst I agree that the turbines would be clearly visible from parts of Loch Breakerdale, I think that the turbines are adequately set back and appear within the moorland backdrop and would not appear to be located within the coastal landscape of Loch Breakadale. It might be worth referring to a couple of the viewpoints that are in and around Loch Breakadale, so it might be worth having a look at viewpoints 20 from the core path to Idrigill Point and viewpoint 21 from Oronsay.
So that's CD 1.17.
We get those out, yeah.
Yeah.
CD 1.17.
Viewpoints 20 and 21.
I think if we could look first at viewpoint 20.
Right, so these are views from Idrigill, core path, and from Oronsay.
Sir. Now, which of the visualizations are you looking at?
So I was thinking, I'm happy to look straight at the photo montages for both of those views. I think that's probably, in this instance, most helpful. Again, I note that Nature Scott consultation response notes that due to the setback from the coast, combined with the relative limited horizontal extent of the development, it would reduce the level of severity of the effects to a degree that we consider would not raise issues of national interest. And again, my assessment is that the turbines sit well within the moorland background, and they are perceived within the moorland background and not within the coastal landscape of Loch Breakadale itself. And I think that's evident in both viewpoint 20 and 21.
Specifically in relation to Idrigill core path, is it 20H that you're looking at?
Yes, I'm looking at the photo montage in 20H.
And you're just making the point in relation to the turbines being set well back?
Yes, that's correct.
How would you describe from this photo montage the coastal area?
So I think the photo montage is a very focused view on the proposed development. It's not necessarily the view that you would get from Idrigill Point when you're here. The main views from this location are really across the loch in the other direction, so you would get much more expanse of the Loch Breakadale and the seascape area. But in this view, in the direction towards the proposed development, then again there is the strong coastal edge which the core path walks alongside, and then there's also the sort of crofting settlement that forms the edge. And again, that crofting settlement is a different colour. There's a much more of a green colour. There's a clear sort of linear element to the sort of white houses that are clearly there, and then that gives way to moorland, which forms the backdrop. So again, the moorland isn't necessarily in the SLA, but it does form the backdrop. And again, in my view, the turbines sit within that moorland backdrop. They don't appear to come down into the crofting landscape.
And in relation to Oronsea, which are the photomontages, well, it's the photomontage you indicated you wanted to look at. What number is that in that series?
21 each.
That's also H. And again here, you can see that the proposed development is, again, well separated from the coastal edge and is perceived within the moorland backdrop. And whilst it's part of the moorland backdrop, it doesn't appear as part of either the crofting landscape or the seascape of Loch Breakerdale. It's definitely positioned within the moorland. That is the backdrop to the seascape, but not the seascape itself.
Thank you. Have we finished with those figures? In the other folder, viewpoint 9 in relation to MacLeod's table, is there a photomontage of relevance to this issue?
Yes, I think viewpoint 9 is from the high point, one of the local high points, the summit of MacLeod's Table North. It's a very elevated viewpoint, and therefore you get a different perspective.
Could you just wait a moment, please,
yeah.
until that viewpoint is looked
Yeah.
at? Which figure are you at?
The photomontage is a G, 9G. And again, just from a different perspective looking down, you can see the spatial separation of the proposed development. You can see the sort of crofting landscape and the setback that has been included of the development clearly within the moorland landscape. I do appreciate that the proposed turbines are coming a little closer than the existing development, and they're obviously much larger in scale, and therefore there would be a greater effect than the existing. But the degree of setback and separation from the crofting landscapes and the coast is quite this is a different perspective and quite useful in that regard.
So as far as
What was the acknowledgement you made? Sorry, I missed that.
I acknowledge that the proposed turbines are coming a little closer to the crofting landscape, but And also, obviously, the turbines are considerably larger than the existing ones, and therefore the effect is going to be greater. But I think there is still adequate setback, and the proposal is still within the moorland backdrop.
If we, having got those photomontages in mind, going back to the methodology issue that we discussed at the beginning, how would you describe the Ben Aketil repowering in terms of additional cumulative effects?
Yeah, sorry.
I wasn't quite understanding the question. Are we talking about additional effects in terms of additional added to a cumulative baseline? In which case, which cumulative baseline?
Yes, I think the additional effects, again, as I've referred to them, are cumulative. So I think the consented, well, I guess the cumulative, but I guess in particular the consented baseline. If it might be worth, again, I know we've just been at the McLeod's tables, but if we go back to, again, Loch Breakerdale and consider the cumulative effects, if we look at viewpoint 20, if you look at the baseline wire lines, say 20A and 20C, So 20A and 20C are illustrating the baseline cumulative, and again, if we assume that Ben Scar, Edenbane, Glen Ullinish and Ben Venich are present in the moorland backdrop, the additional effect would be the change from adding Ben Aketil to that baseline, whereas the total effect would be to consider the effect of all of those sites together against an existing baseline of Edenbane being present. And in terms of the effect on the SLA and landscape character, I've assessed that both the additional and total combined effect of Ben Aketil repowering in scenario 2, which is the fully consented baseline, would not be significant. And this is due to the space between the clusters and the setback of the developments from the loch, and that in both those situations the effect would be not significant. But I do acknowledge that there would be a moderate adverse effect in places. In terms of visual receptors, I think we are agreed with the Council in that with the restored baseline there would be a moderate adverse effect, which would be significant in places, noting that Mr. Fitzpatrick has considered the cumulative effect at viewpoint 20 with the consented baseline would be moderate and marginally significant.
Ms. Anderson, could I ask you to just go a little bit more slowly, please?
And I think there's probably one more thing that I might like to just draw out of looking at these baseline wire lines. When we have produced additional information too, we updated the visuals and separated out both the baseline and the proposals. And we followed the guidance that Nature Scott has updated. And in there, we do include the existing Ben-Aketil as part of, in the wireline diagram. But obviously, that won't be present if the proposal goes ahead. And therefore, these baseline wire lines do produce an image that perhaps appears a little bit more complex than would actually exist. So it's definitely worth having just being aware of that and being conscious that that does produce an image that appears overly complex, especially if you compare that to wireline 20B, which is the proposed baseline. Which is the proposed baseline, which shows Ben-Aketil and Ben-Scar redesign. And at this distance, the difference between the consented and the redesign is not so great. And I think you can see the difference of the image. So again, when looking at those baseline, whilst we've produced these in accordance with Nature Scott's guidelines, they do provide a little bit of extra complexity that wouldn't actually exist. And so worth bearing in mind that when considering it against the consented baseline, that the effects are more likely to be as in the proposed with Ben-Scar. And I guess if we are looking at this proposed baseline visualization, what I would say is that I do agree with the Council and their position that if you added the collective baseline of scenario 3, which is what's illustrated in that view, the combined effect would be significant.
That's combined effects with Glenolinish 2, with Edinburgh repowering, with Balmenach, with Ben-Scar redesign. Yeah.
Not quite with Edinburgh repowering, because that's in scenario 4, because that's still in scoping. But in terms, I know it's tricky, but in terms of the other proposals at planning application stage, yes, that's Ben-Scar redesign, Balmenach, and Glenolinish 2, but yeah, I think that's enough.
So far, are you still considering that point?
No, please proceed, yeah.
Another issue that I think is between you and Mr. Daly relates to the low smooth moorland landscape character type.
Yes. If we refer perhaps to figure 4 of additional information.
Is that CD 1.16?
Yes, that's CD 1.16.
CD 1.16 has got figure 4, has it? Is that reference correct?
I believe so. I believe so. So the low smooth moorland in that figure is illustrated with the brightest sort of pinky purple colour. Yeah. And there are a few different units or landscape character areas of this landscape type in the study area. The nearest two units are located to the southwest and to the northeast of the site, and they occur generally as the more elevated areas of moorland within Central Skye drop down to meet the various lochs. I have not identified a significant effect on the low smooth moorland landscape character type, and this is in part as I've considered the sensitivity to be medium stroke low, whereas Mr. Daly has considered it to be medium and Miss Platt of high sensitivity. I note that Mr. Daly has focused his detailed assessment on just a single unit or landscape character area to the southwest of the site between Loch Dunvegan and Loch Breakerdale. I've considered the magnitude of change to be moderate stroke slight on this landscape character type and with a moderate stroke minor effect. And if you refer to the bare earth ZTVs in the EIA, which is figure 6.5 or again KA figure 1, it shows that these figures show a combination of both bare earth and hub height visibility. And I note that the intervisibility from some parts of the landscape character area to the southwest would be more variable due to the partial screening by landform, including Ben Vatten. And so, Ben Vatten, which is, again, a sort of hill between the proposed development and the area of smooth moorland to the southwest. I note that Mr. Daly agrees that the scale of change would vary across this landscape character area, and he has assessed that there would be a substantial stroke moderate magnitude of change across part of the area around Fjorlig or Vatten, which results in a major moderate effect. But he's assessed a moderate magnitude of change for the part of the area west of Heribos or Roskill, which results in a moderate but not significant effect. So the extent of low smooth moorland that Mr. Daly has considered there to be a significant effect is relatively small in extent. And part of that area has screening by landform.
And is a screening from landform something that you can appreciate from your figure KA1 attached to your AI2 report?
Yes, KA1 also includes a ZTV. It illustrates both core paths and the SLA, but in terms of a ZTV, it is a bare earth rather than screening. So, but it doesn't have landscape character areas overlaid.
So just to be clear, which would you recommend having regard to in order to understand the points you're making?
Either will work. They're both similar.
Looking at your document KA1, specifically, could you describe what you take out of this figure as confirming your analysis?
Yeah, I think you can see that there is an area to
Sorry,
the
can you
south.
just repeat the document number?
KA1, it's attached to the
It's fine, I've got it here. Yeah.
right.
Yeah, so again, you can see that there is an area of reduced visibility between Vatten and the site, and part of that is part of the low smooth moorland.
Can I just check I'm looking at the right document? Is it's that one?
A map that came in with recognition.
I'm advised that it's also core document 13.2. No, yeah, 13.2.
KA1. Right here. Yep. Good. Yep. Got that now.
To pointing out what it is you're taking from the figure to draw your conclusion.
Yeah, I've just... Yeah, you got that, didn't you? Yeah, that's fine, yeah.
Turning from the council and its evidence, in relation to Upper Eden Bain, Miss Platt has produced a figure with her report, which is figure 5. And that's CD 15.8. Have you got that in front of you?
Yes.
Sorry, you've produced your own document as well, which was one of the documents that was received late to respond to this issue.
Yes, in my precognition, I've urged caution with the use of this figure, and we've submitted CD 13.10, which is viewpoint 2 from the Ben Scar redesign. It's a viewpoint from Edenbane Top Road. And if the reporter could perhaps have a look at that viewpoint.
So can you just remind me of that figure number?
Yeah, so it's CD 13.10. It was a relatively late submission to the core documents, and it's viewpoint 2 of Ben Scar redesign submitted in 2024, and it's called Edenbane Top Road.
Sorry folks, sorry to interrupt. Who needs the internet password? You're needing that? You don't speak there. There we go. Sorry.
So if you've got that up, it would be worth having a look. There's quite a few pages in that viewpoint, but if we look at page 3, that is a wireline, and the top image is a photograph, and that photograph is the middle photograph of Miss Platt's figure 5. But in this viewpoint, it illustrates, the wireline below illustrates the proposals, and in that view you can see Ballymena are orange turbines, illustrated as orange turbines to the left of the Ben Scar array, and the Ben Aketil are also orange, but they're behind the Ben Scar array. So in this wireline, from this viewpoint, you can see that there are 4 hubs and a further 2 tips of Ben Aketil repowering visible. So that wireline is from Edenbane Top Road, and that illustrates the Ben Aketil from that viewpoint.
And I think you indicated before, is that the tips of the orange turbines behind the blue turbines?
So yes, so the Ben Aketil, again, there's a little note at the top which indicates which is Ben Aketil, because all of the proposals are orange. So it's not the ones to the left, which is Ballymena, but it's the ones behind Ben Scar. So yes, those 4 hubs and a further 2 tips are visible directly behind Ben Scar redesign.
And you were comparing that to which of the visualizations in Miss Platt's figure 5?
So it's not directly comparable, but the photograph is the same. And really, I just wanted the reporter to consider this viewpoint rather than necessarily. I'm not entirely sure what Miss Platt's figure is representing, but I thought if the reporter was interested in the impacts from Edenbane of the Ben Aketil repowering, then having an actual wireline of what the visibility would be like would be helpful in making that determination. And I'm not, in looking at this image, I'm not quite sure. There's a pink line at the top which says Edenbane repowering. I'm not quite sure what that means, but I don't think that's particularly relevant. But I think what's also relevant, I think, in terms of views from Upper Edinburgh is if you go to, if you look at page 8 of this same viewpoint, as I say, this viewpoint 2 from has quite a few pages. I think there's about a dozen pages in there. But view page 8 of that, what you see is the view to the southeast, and in there you can see about a dozen operational Edinburgh wind turbines clearly visible above the horizon. And whilst the Edinburgh repowering turbines would clearly be much larger than those at Edinburgh, due to the greater distance and the screening by landform, they would not appear larger or more influential than the existing turbines. Again, as I've stated in my precognition, I would recommend to the reporter to consider the effects at Upper Edinburgh with regard to this visualisation, rather than the one prepared by Miss Platt in her Inquirer report. And I note that Mr. Fitzpatrick now considers there to be a significant effect at Upper Edinburgh. Again, as I've stated in my precognition, and therefore won't repeat here, whilst there is some visibility, I do not believe that there would be a significant visual effect for residents as a result of the Aketil repowering.
Is there a similar viewpoint for the consented Benska?
You mean to illustrate what's consented?
Yeah, I mean, if I was to visit this viewpoint, it would be helpful to have both the consented and the redesign. And it's not. I don't think it's on. I don't think it's on this. Unless I'm missing it.
No, it is odd that it isn't. I suspect. I don't know. I could have a look and see if we can find a. Yeah.
That would be helpful.
So in response to your query, Ms. Anderson was just explaining that she would have to go onto the internet to find it.
It's not necessary just now, and if you want to produce it for when I would do the site inspection, essentially, unless other parties have a strong feeling about that they need to see it before then.
If I could just turn, I'm coming towards the end of this, but to the question of design, which is commented upon. How would you describe, under reference to your own evidence, whether or not there has been continuity of design from the original Ben Aketil design?
Yes, I think I would perhaps call it similarity rather than a strict continuity. I think, having reflected on that, I think that's probably a better description of the proposed Ben Aketil design compared to the original. I think in the intervening time since the original was built, the cumulative baseline has changed, and the proposed Ben Aketil redesign work has been designed to work with the consented Ben SCA, which is now quite near and has been consented, given their proximity and their similarity in terms of landscape context. So, again, not a strict continuity, but more of a similarity. Again, the two developments have designed to work together, and they would appear as kind of three lines of turbines in places. So, but I do appreciate that the turbine size and spacing of the consented Ben SCA is part way between the operational and the proposed repowering. So there is still some contrast with the spacing and the turbine size with the consented Ben SCA. However, it wouldn't be too dissimilar to the difference between the operational Ben Aketil and the consented Ben SCA. Both of these sites appear together in many views due to their proximity and similar landscape context, and do appreciate that together, combined, they would provide a greater density of turbines visible. But then the power generation would also be much larger of the new combined array. And whilst I do appreciate that this would lead to some stacking and a greater complexity of the array than currently exists. But on reflection, the consent of Ben SCA to the operational Ben Aketil would already start to have eroded some of the original design of the operational Ben Aketil, and would already start to introduce stacking, which is illustrated in many of the baseline wire lines. So again, if we perhaps wanted to go back and have a look or have an example of that, if we again went back to our viewpoint 20, again just for ease since it's close at hand, and we've already had some discussion about that. Again, I've already urged caution. Urge caution with regard to the use of the consented baseline visualization, and perhaps if we consider wireline 20B, which is the proposal, and look at Ben Aketil and Ben SCA redesign, I think there you can see how the two work well together, and it does show the similar design that's been undertaken for both of those schemes. And again, I think that's in contrast perhaps to some of the other proposals, such as Ballymenic or Glenurlinish, where They've used different design similarity. They've used a different sort of design to come up with the array, and you can see that it does read differently in the landscape, whereas when you look at Ben Aketil and Ben Ska, you can see that there is a design similarity between the two, and they do work well. So whilst there is a little bit more stacking rather than just a single line, they still read together well as a simple array, as a simple combined array.
Going to another issue related to design. There's a description in your evidence about localized effects, so far as Ben Aketil is concerned, and you describe in some detail under reference to measured distances as to what you consider would be the, I think you go between, as you say, 10 to 12 kilometres.
Yes, so I've assessed and reviewed a lot of reports over the years, and I would say that, yes, the extent of significant effects extend somewhere between 10 and 12 kilometres from the development, and again, that's no greater than I would expect for a development of this scale. It's not uncommon for significant effects for groups of turbines 200 metres tall to extend out to 10, 12, or even more in isolated locations. So, yeah, I would say it's no greater than would be expected. And I think the other thing to point out is that whilst the significant effects do extend to those sorts of distances and not beyond, they wouldn't be felt uniformly within that distance. So it's not uniformly within 10 to 12. It's, in fact, mainly to the southwest where you get the greater distance, and it's much more restricted, particularly to the east and north. And so not all receptors within that area would experience significant effects.
The final matter.
Right, just to confirm that's visual effects, isn't it, that we're talking about, the extent? Yeah.
The final matter arises from Mr. Brockie's report, and he makes comment in his report in the context of cultural heritage on visual significant effects, and he's produced productions with his inquiry report. I think in Appendix 4, if you could have that, please.
Yes, I have that.
And CD 14.5 is where his analysis of the viewpoint photomontages occur. This is an issue that you address in your precognition.
Yes, I noted in my precognition that the visuals in Appendix 4 had been enlarged by approximately 40 to 60%.
So before you go on from that, just as we're looking at the first figure in this bundle, 4.1, is it those visualizations that you're referring to?
Yes, yes.
So the red and green representations that we're seeing superimposed above or inserted above the cultural heritage site, Dunvegan Castle, is it those representations that you're referring to as being enlarged?
Yes, what Mr. Brocky has included in his appendix are enlarged versions of the other viewpoints, of the Highland Council viewpoints that we've produced for the scheme. Yes.
And I think you wanted to revise your main evidence in relation to what you described as the parameter of the enlargement, 60%.
Yes, I've reviewed it and I've realised that appendices 4.1, 4.3 and 4.4 have been increased by 50%, approximately 50%, but appendices 4.2 and 4.5 have only been increased by about 12%. So a lesser degree than I had originally indicated.
I wonder if you could just read those numbers again.
Yes, happy to do that. So appendices 4.1, 4.3, 4.4 have been increased by approximately 50%, but appendices 4.2 and 4.5 have only been increased by approximately 12%. So a lesser enlargement.
Thank you.
And does that cause you to change your opinion that you've expressed in your evidence?
No.
Could you explain why?
I'm not entirely sure why an enlargement is necessary. The Highland Council guidelines on visualisation material already include an enlargement, so they include both a 50mm as well as a 75mm. So that's an enlargement on top of the enlargement.
You also make points in your evidence about re-rendering in these photomontages or visualizations. Could you just explain to the reporter what specifically concerns you in that regard?
So in Appendix 4.5 of Mr. Brocky's inquiry report, he includes a re-rendering of the turbines that we had, of the photomontage that we'd prepared, as if all of the turbines were being backlit or as if all the turbines were in shadow, which is very inconsistent with the lighting conditions in the baseline photography. So whilst you would not get lighting conditions where the castle is visible as indicated in the photography, and the turbines would be backlit or in deep shadow in the way that Mr. Brocky has presented it. Otherwise, if that were the case and it were all to be in shadow, then the castle itself would also be in shadow and wouldn't be a discernible feature on the opposite shore. And I also note that he has modified those turbines to be so dark that you might think they've been painted a dark grey colour, but they are indeed painted a sort of light grey or off-white colour. And so whilst I do appreciate that Mr. Brocky has said that they are indicative only, I would urge caution in relying on those as the likely visual impact.
When you're referring to the turbines being in a dark colour, is that the photograph that we see in Appendix 4.5?
Yes, in the one at the bottom. So he puts one on top of the other and has made those turbines so dark in full sunshine that you just wouldn't get that situation where everything in the foreground, including the castle, is all in bright sunshine and the turbines would appear that dark. So again, just urging the reporter caution in terms of what Mr. Brocky has illustrated.
Thank you, Ms. Anderson. So that concludes the evidence in chief.
It's now 12 o'clock. Do you want to press on, or should we take a brief break, so 15 minutes?
So I may have missed it, but I didn't hear what you proposed to do for lunch.
I was proposing not to do anything for lunch. I was proposing just to press on to 2:30. I'll take this one short break, and I'll take two short breaks before then. So I would propose to take a break now, and then another short break somewhere halfway between now and 2:30.
Perfect.
Okay. So short break now, and we'll have 15 minutes. So back in. So 12:20. Thanks. about the microphones. There can only be 2 microphones on at the same time. If you have more than 2 microphones on at the same time, the microphone lights up green rather than red. Or the third microphone lights up green rather than red and is in a queue, so the speaker isn't actually picked up. So we just need to watch out for that.
So green doesn't mean go.
Green means you're not on the microphone. No, that's right. Red means you're speaking. You're live.
I was going to tell Mr. Campbell I couldn't hear what he was saying because he was neither red nor green, but there we go. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Ms. Anderson. You've been involved throughout the production of the evidence. You weren't involved in the scoping, but after that you've been involved in one form or another. Is that correct?
Yes, I came in partway through the LVIA. Yep.
But the approach to the LVIA, I understand you led the LVIA and, as said, item 1.3.1, I think, of your report, and the approach to the LVIA.
Yes, yeah.
Thank you. Now, one of the themes in your recognition, your report, is that the extent, or as you might have it, the lack of extent of difference between you, in particular Mr. Daly and Mr. Fitzpatrick. And I just wanted to have a look at that initially. So if you could take Mr. Daly's evidence, which is his report, which is CD 14.2. And he summarises the 3 particular chapters that we're concerned with of his report are chapters 5, 6 and 7, which deal with landscape impact, special landscape area and cumulative impacts. And he summarises his landscape character evidence at paragraph 551 on page 20. And
yes,
he identifies, he says he doesn't greatly disagree with your assessment, including the restored assessment, which I'll come to in a moment, but he considers there some important material differences, and he sets out 3 in that paragraph. My question was, just to begin with, that he has correctly identified differences between you and him there, has he not?
Yes, there are some differences. Yeah.
Yeah, and those are the differences he's identified.
Yes.
Grateful. And then I'm not going to go through those in detail because otherwise there's so much detail in this case we could be here all week. I'm just trying to identify the differences for the reporter. Then in 552. Assuming a restored baseline, and there is a somewhat truncated discussion on that in your evidence in chief, but we'll come back to that. He's looked at the differences there between the impacts on the restored baseline of the proposal, and looking at his view of the existing Ben Aketil wind turbines only have significant effects to 2 kilometres as opposed to 6 to 7 kilometres. Now, what I wanted to ask you about that was, do you agree as to his assessment of the extent of significant effects of the existing Ben Aketil wind turbines, i.e. being reduced to within approximately 2 kilometres?
I would say that seems a little near, if I'm honest. I don't have a copy of the original EIA for the original Ben Aketil, but I suspect it would probably have extended beyond 2 kilometres for the predicted significant effects, and especially on sort of the host landscape character.
But is that, from your answer, that's something that you haven't put your mind to? I'm not...
No, I haven't set that out anywhere. No, our comparative assessment is different from the way that Mr. Daly has undertaken it.
Well, sure, I necessarily need to get into that. I'm just asking you about that particular, whether or not you have assessed the extent of significant impacts from the existing Ben Aketil wind turbines. My understanding is you haven't, and you think Mr. Daly may have underestimated it in part.
Yes.
Well, then we've identified another difference. Grateful for that, thank you. And then in 553, and this is a matter look at now, he's assessed effects on the seascape character of Loch Bracadale, or Bracadale. I'm not quite sure of the correct Bracadale. Well, thank you. That's what I've been working on. I'm going to call it Bracadale. Whereas you haven't, and you accept that. I mean, that's an accepted difference between you. If you take the GLVIA for the moment, just which is CD 6.1. At page 76, paragraph 5.6.
Sorry, which paragraph reference?
5.6, which is headed Seascape Character Assessment.
Yep, I'm there.
Right. That says, where an LVIA is carried out in a coastal or marine location, baseline studies must take account of seascape. And as defined, I don't think I need to turn to the paragraphs 2.8, 2.9, and it then gives guidance on that. And that follows, just so we can see that in context, on paragraphs and the 5.4 dealing with landscape character assessment, 5.5 dealing with townscape character assessment, and then 5.6 dealing with seascape character assessment. And so it's saying it must be carried out in, if we go to, I think any guidance Mr. Daly pointed to me on this, 6.24, CD 624.
What's the name of that?
Let me just
Nature Scott Special Landscape Qualities Guidance on Assessing Effects 2025.
I'm obliged. Thank you.
Thank you.
Guidance, yes. This is looking at NSAs and national parks, but the idea of looking at special qualities is the same in both, as I understand it. It's at a higher order of national priority, NSAs and national parks, but they identify special qualities as the same as has been done for the SLAs in this case.
Yeah, so this document has been produced by Nature Scott to, as you say, assess the effects of special qualities on national parks and national scenic areas.
Yeah. And if you go to paragraph 7 on page 2, paragraph 7, I won't read it out, but it's making two important points once you've read it. Just remind yourself of it. It's making that the 2 points I'd suggest it's making is that an LVIA is different from an assessment of impact on special qualities, but the second point is you have to be beware of double counting. Do you agree with that?
Yes, yes, they complement but don't duplicate. Yeah.
Okay, they complement but don't duplicate. That's very neatly put. And if you look at the special qualities, and I don't think we need to go to them, they're in CD 615 from page 72 onwards. The special qualities of the SLA are a mixture of landscape and visual and cultural and historic. Those are the factors that lead into the special qualities. Whereas if you're just doing a seascape character assessment, you're looking at the seascape, not necessarily the cultural, historic and visual impacts.
No, I would disagree. I mean, I think when you carry out a landscape or a seascape, you are still looking at those elements as well.
Well, my understanding of a landscape impact assessment, although there is a visual aspect to it, it is different from a visual impact assessment.
Yes, it is. It is different.
So, likewise, a seascape assessment has a visual aspect to it, but it's different from the visual element of a visual impact assessment.
Yes, they're linked but separate. Yeah.
And was it a conscious decision not to do a seascape assessment of Loch Bracadale?
Yes, as I said in my examination in chief, it wasn't requested at scoping, and again, it was well covered under the assessment of Loch Bracadale. I think
quite an answer to my question. Was it a conscious decision of yours not to do a seascape assessment, notwithstanding the advice in GLVIA that I've just taken you to?
So the advice in GLVIA is really implying that the development would be in that marine location, whereas the proposed development is set within the moorland and clearly set back from the marine location. So again, if we were perhaps doing a development whereby we were doing a new quay within Loch Bracadale, for instance, then I think that would be useful to do, to carry out a seascape assessment. But in fact, our proposed development is within the moorland rather than within the seascape.
Well, I think that demonstrates a rather limited view of seascape assessment. If one were to turn back to the GLVIA, its views in, to and from the seascape that may be important. But certainly if you look at Nature Scott's consultation response, they're concerned as to, in effect, the lack of a seascape assessment on Loch Bracadale, aren't they?
No, I don't believe they asserted that there was a lack of assessment. I think they were identifying that there was the potential for a significant effect in the Loch Bracadale's area. And again, I think, as I said, that's been, it was assessed within the LVIA as part of the North West Coast SLA. And again, I've covered it in my inquiry report in a bit more detail with regard specifically to Loch Bracadale.
Well, it's not. I obviously accept that you covered it now in greater detail in your report. I was primarily concerned with why that hadn't formed part of the LVI at the time, and I'll come back to the Nature Scott response in due course, so we can take that as a one. So, coming back to the extent of differences between you and Mr. Daly, that deals with Chapter 5. He then looks at the Northwest Skies Special Landscape Area in his Chapter 6, and his conclusions on that are at 637 to 639. And he and you agree that there wouldn't be an overall effect on the overall integrity of the designation. That's 637. But he considers there would be some significant adverse effects on parts of it. And he also considers that the existing Ben Aketil turbines would have no significant adverse effects to any of the qualities of the SLA. Taking those in reverse order, do you accept or do you agree with him as to 639?
Yes.
And do you agree with him as to 638?
No, as I've stated, I don't believe that there are significant effects in the Loch-Breckdale area of the SLA.
So there's another important disagreement with him. And then if we turn on to cumulative impacts, he deals with those in Chapter 7, from 738 onwards. And he notes that in the first sentence there is agreement, but he notes important differences in the 2 bullet points on 738, and he's correctly identified those differences, hasn't he?
Yes.
Then in 739 he says it's noted that the updated LVAIA does not consistently report a comparative assessment. The conclusion I draw from this is that in attempting to assess the additional cumulative contribution of effects over and above those of existing turbines is simply too complex. It's not a criticism, but is that a fair comment?
I think it is fair to say, as I've kind of opened, that the assessment was getting incredibly complicated, and I think having to do it in retrospect, I think is definitely more complex than having to do it as part of an application originally, and therefore I would agree. I tried to simplify it as far as possible to try and make it as digestible as possible.
Great. I'm grateful that Mr. Daly's understood your approach. Then he makes a comment about the existing Aketil turbines having very limited, significant additional cumulative effects, where those of the proposed development extend to several landscape ski character types and areas. Is that something that you've assessed or not?
Again, I haven't assessed the effects of the operational Aketil, I guess, alone, without Vein. I'm not entirely sure what the basis of that actual assessment would be, but no, I haven't assessed it as in the way that Mr. Daly has.
Grateful. Well,
just to understand it, the way I understand he's working, we can certainly ask him about this, but the way I understand he's working it is that he's imagining a situation in which the existing turbines are added to a baseline of either consented or proposed, well, the 2 different scenarios. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then in 740, we're coming back to the Loch-Breckdale seascape area, and he's considers that there would be a significant impact of the scenario 2. Now, is that something you haven't assessed the Loch-Breckdale in seascape terms, but is that something you agree with or disagree with?
Sorry, I lost the question.
Do you agree or disagree with his conclusion that there would be a significant impact in scenario 2 on the Loch-Breckdale seascape character area?
I disagree. Yeah.
Disagree. So, and then he also, and then in 741, and this is a clear disagreement with you, he finds a significant cumulative impacts on the SLA in the Loch-Breckdale area. And that's a disagreement with you, isn't it?
So in terms of cumulative, in which scenario?
I may just have to. I understood that was S2 and S3. S2 and so scenario 2 and scenario 3.
So I have identified some significant impacts on the SLA with regard to scenario 3, particularly with regard to sort of the combined impacts of both proposal and some of the other.
But not scenario 2.
But not scenario 2.
Well, then I've identified those. And then in Appendix 2 of his report, he goes through the criteria of the onshore wind energy supplementary guidance, and that is dealt with in the LVIA in CD 1.2 and Chapter 6 at Table 6.7. And I should have, I think I've assumed this, but I assume you were the author or ally yourself with the comments in Chapter 6, which is the LVIA chapter.
Yeah.
So hang on, let me just bring that up. Not sure I've got that open at the moment. So, I think it's electronic page 105, and let me just see if I can find
I think it's hard copy 6.6.
Sorry?
I think it's hard copy 6.6.
Hard copy 6.6. Yes, it is. Thank you very much. Do you have that now, sir? And obviously this table is somewhat out of date in that I'm not aware that any updated table has been done since the further work.
No, we've not updated this table.
So just running through the criteria in Appendix 2 and by contrasting with this table, there's where we see a bold writing on the right-hand column, there's effectively a finding of conflict with the criteria by Mr. Daly, and under criterion, he's called it criterion 2 at the top of the page, but I think that should be criterion 1. He's found conflict, and there's no in your table 6.7 under the similar criteria. You find consistency, so there's a lack of agreement there. The criteria is whether the wider landscape will be respected. He's found that it wouldn't be respected in the instances he's given. You disagree with that?
Yes. Sorry.
Criteria 2, there's agreement between you, so we don't need to cover that about key gateways. Criteria 3, and here we're looking primarily at valued natural landmarks. He makes the point in his table that whilst the cultural heritage judgments are beyond the scope of his report, he considers there would be a significant adverse visual effect to the views of Dunvegan Castle across Loch Dunvegan with the turbines behind it. Am I right in thinking that you now accept on the restored baseline there would be significant impacts from viewpoint 10?
Yes.
So there's agreement there now.
I think there are visual effects on
Yes.
visual receptors rather than necessarily on impacts of cultural heritage.
But he's made it clear he's not commenting about cultural heritage. I'm not asking you about cultural heritage. I'm asking you about visual impacts at the moment from viewpoint 10. I think, though, that is a change that under the comparative assessment, I'm not sure you did find a significant impact there, but under the restored assessment, you do.
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you. Criterion 4, which is the amenity of key recreation routes and ways, is respected. There is agreement as to the overall outcome, but he finds some significant and adverse visual impacts on sections of the core path network, including those to Idrigal Point and to Oronsay. But overall, they wouldn't be overwhelmed or significantly detracted from. Is that a judgment you agree with or disagree with?
Yes, agree
You
with
agree
that.
with.
Yep.
Grateful, thank you. And likewise, in criteria 5, which deals with transport routes, he's reached the view that there would be some significant and adverse visual effects for substantial lengths of 2 roads, and although they wouldn't be overwhelmed. Again, is that something you agree with or disagree with?
I agree that they wouldn't be overwhelmed, yeah.
But there would be significant adverse visual effects for substantial lengths of those roads?
For a couple of the lengths of the roads, certainly the A863, there would be a significant effect near the site. So, yes, I would agree with that. And again, the road over to Colbos, I think, again, there are going to be significant effects, particularly with the restored baseline for that. But
Grateful. I mean, I'm not cross-examining you on the difference between your original Table 1 and this, because we've all agreed matters have moved on in your assessment, but just ask the reporter to note the different entries in Table 1 as it was then compiled. Criterion 6, that is, existing pattern of wind energy development is respected. You find no issues in that table, whereas Mr. Daly does. The scale of the proposed development extends significantly the effects of this cluster beyond the interior moorland and to the more sensitive coastal landscape of Loch Bracadale and the special landscape area. Do you agree with that criticism or not? I'm not quite sure.
no, I do disagree. That is an area where we disagree.
So that's another, probably consistent with earlier disagreements we pointed out. Criteria 7, there's agreement over. Criteria 8, there would be disagreement with you there as to the turbines being of overwhelming scale or not. So we can take your disagreeing as that. And likewise, criteria 9 and criteria 10, there's disagreement with the application of all those criterion as I understand it.
Yes. Yes.
Come to some of those measures, but that's a significant level of disagreement with Mr. Daly, isn't it?
Well, again, that's your opinion. I don't think it's a huge amount of disagreement, but if you believe it is.
Then with Mr. Fitzpatrick, his evidence is CD 14.3, and put Mr. Daly's away. And I think you've already gone to table 3.1 and explained why there isn't the absolute comparison that there was for the LVIA, but not for the update in March of this year. But leaving that aside, has he identified the differences between the LVIA and his approach accurately, in your view?
In some locations, but I think in others, I'm not sure he's fully appreciated some of the changes from the FEI.
Right. But in terms of, I'll leave that Ms. Wilson to cross-examine him on, but in terms of the original EIA, he has been accurate.
Yes.
Wonderful. And then in 6.8, looking at cumulative visual impacts, in table 6.1 on page 13, I say table 6.1 on page 13 because there's also table 6.1 on page 16. So the numbering hasn't quite caught up with itself. Again, it's just for the reporters, has he correctly identified the differences between you and him in respect of cumulative visual impacts?
I'm afraid I haven't looked at this in detail with regard to that specific question.
If you haven't looked at it in detail...
Well, I guess in terms of the scale of cumulative change, I think what I've identified in the additional information too was the magnitude. So if that's what he's used. So this is illustrating his impacts. This is the
yes, so columns 2 and 3, the first column, 2 and 3, are what he understands your case to be, and the second columns, 2 and 3, are what he understands his case to be. Yeah. Well, if you haven't looked at that in detail, I'm not going to take time to go through that now, but that's a matter you can come back on if necessary. And then he sets out his appraisal of the additional cumulative visual effects in the second table, 6.1 on page 16. Grateful. Just want to pick up one other reference. Yes, if you... He's returned to the issue of extent of significant visual impacts in his precognition, paragraphs 23 and 24. That is CD 14.8.
Sorry, what was the paragraph reference?
23 and 24.
Yes, I've got that.
And I think I had you noted in evidence in chief saying that there were visual effects extending out to 11 to 12 kilometres, but not on a, if one can imagine a circle drawn 11 to 12 kilometres out, it wouldn't cover every part of that circle. What Mr. Fitzpatrick has done in his diagram below paragraph 24 is to illustrate where he thinks the significant visual extents might extend to, which is broadly consistent with your outline. My question to you, is that broadly consistent with your view? I'm not going to ask you every bit of the map, but...
To some degree, yes, but not entirely. So I don't believe that there are significant effects on the northern McGuinness Peninsula, for instance, and I don't think that the significant effects extend into Loch Breakdale quite as far as Mr. Fitzpatrick has extended it. And again, need to look at that in a bit more detail. And again, I don't think it extends as far northeast as Mr. Fitzpatrick. So not quite to the full extent that Mr. Fitzpatrick has identified. So some of those, but I mean the broad shape is, I would agree with, but perhaps not as extensive.
Grateful. That's very helpful. So that's the extent of difference between you and Highland Council witnesses. What I want to do now is look at the extent of differences between you and Nature Scott in terms of their consultation response. And that consultation response was CD 217.
Yes.
And they deal with the impact on Loch Brachdale in the second bullet point of their summary. I'm not going to go to that in detail. If we go on to page 2, looking at landscape and visual effects, they, like Highland Council, don't assert any effect on the NSAs or the objectives of those designations. They find significant adverse effects individually and cumulatively on the distinctive landscape of Loch Brachdale. I think we've already established you disagree with that. Do you accept, though, their comment that Loch Brachdale makes a major contribution to diverse coastal scenery of Skye?
Yes, it does make a contribution, yeah.
To what extent do you agree with the next sentence, that the proposal would diminish the experience and enjoyment of this richly scenic and well-visited coastal landscape, distracting from and dominating the scenic, intricate, low-lying, small-scale coastal landscape and dynamic seascape of Loch Brachdale? And just before we answer that question, when some people may use the word dominating loosely, but one can expect Nature Scott to understand what they mean by the word dominate. It means more than prominent, it means dominant. So do you accept that or not?
No, I don't agree.
Then they then go on, and this is a point you've made, to make it clear in that paragraph, they don't think that because of the particular location of Ben Aketil, it doesn't raise issues of national interest. But we're not here debating whether or not it raises issues of national interest. But do you accept that?
Well, yes, I mean, that's their advice, and I'm not debating that. I'm a landscape.
I'm just exploring how much you understand that. Nature Scott will only object if they think that the impact raises matters of national interest. It may raise, if the impacts may be very important, but if they don't reach the level of national interest, Nature Scott won't object. Is that your understanding?
Well, I think you'd have to ask Nature Scott, but I know that they have objected to other developments where, you know, if you're saying there aren't any impacts on the national scenic areas or wildland areas or national parks, I have seen them object to sites where those haven't been affected.
Absolutely. And it's where, I'm suggesting to you, it's where they consider they raise issues of national interest. They then make a point about significantly reducing the impacts if you deployed turbines at less than 150 metres. And there's no proposal or variation for turbines less than 150 metres before this inquiry, is there?
That's correct.
Then if we turn to Annex 1, which gives their detailed comments on landscape and visual. Under the submitted landscape and visual impact assessment, this is on certainly electronic page 5 and page 5 of the document, they make the point that you've solely considered the increase of effects over and above those, not with a restored baseline. And we'll come on to look at that separately in a moment. But factually, that was correct at the time, and you've, as you've explained, provided a restored baseline assessment.
Yes, that's correct. In
the third paragraph under that, they noted that there had been no assessment of the well-used route to Oronsay Island or the route to Idrigal Point. Had you walked those routes, or had people from your firm walk those routes when the LVIA was submitted?
Walked in part. In part.
Had they reached Idrigal Point?
No.
Do you accept that the omission of those routes was an important omission in the LVIA?
No, I think that when we carried out our original assessment, with regard to the screening ZTV, there was quite a significant amount of tree cover that was indicated to provide quite a lot of screening. And again, the direction to the development from that route is very oblique. So again, in views from that route, your views are very much across Loch Breakerdale to a slightly different part of the moorland, but do appreciate that it is visible. And I also think that the cumulative situation has changed quite considerably. So again, in terms of when we undertook the LVIA, the cumulative was quite a different picture than it certainly is now. So yes, I think for all of those reasons, we've included those additional 2 viewpoints in the updated information, and I think that is useful to the reporter.
Well, I certainly agree that it's useful to the reporter. The question is where it should have been there from the outset. But 2 points on your answer. First of all, if you're walking out to Idrigal Point, the wind farm isn't really going to impact on you at all, is it? Either the existing or the proposed, because primarily you're walking away from it.
Yeah, on the route out, yeah.
Whereas when you're walking back from Idrigal Point, suggests that the current wind farm is clearly apparent, if I can, without calling it dominant or prominent, but it's clearly apparent for significant lengths of that route in your view, and draws attention to itself because it is moving.
I would disagree. It's not for significant lengths. I mean, it is visible for a couple of lengths, but not for significant lengths. There is still quite a lot of standing forestry, and to be honest, in that direction, because you're working up and down that ridge, it's quite often screened because, again, the coastline is very dramatic and it is often screens itself from there. So it's not like you're walking down a smooth slope whereby you get a consistent view. You're actually walking along the undulations, and it isn't visible for significant lengths.
Well, not quite what I put to you, and I certainly agree with you, it's not a smooth slope. But the second point is more this: the fact that there hadn't been a proper exploration of the impacts on the route to Oronsay Island or Idrigal Point, has that not contributed to your under-assessment of impacts on Loch Breakerdale? Because once you've formed an initial view as a result of inadequate assessment, that view is difficult to displace, is it not?
No, I don't think it is. I stand by the assessment, and I have walked those routes, and I do agree I think if there was a change, then we could have easily incorporated that into the additional information when we included those viewpoints. So I think we could have easily changed our minds. It's not uncommon for things to be amended as we move towards inquiry. So I disagree. I don't think, I think we could have changed our mind if we felt that was needed.
Well, hear what you say, and we can make submissions on that. If we move on in the document to effects on landscape and coastal character, which is at page 6, the first paragraph effectively records what's in agreement, that the LCT of itself has capacity to accommodate the proposed increased size of the turbines. But it's the concern of Nature Scott, as they identify at the end of that sentence, is that the increased effects on more sensitive adjoining landscape are a key issue. Would you agree that they've identified the correct key issue?
Yes, I would.
Thank you. And then they say, contrary to the findings of the LVI, we consider the proposed landscape development result in significant impacts on the farmed and settled lowlands and the steppe moorland, and the wider seascape character of Loch Bracadale. My understanding is you disagree with most of that.
Well, I mean, we've not identified, again, as part of the restored, so we've not identified a significant effect on the seascape of Loch Bracadale, either with regard to the National Scenic, with regard to the SLA. So, yeah, disagree.
Then, under effects on distinctive landscapes, there's a paragraph at the bottom of the page starting with the distinctiveness of Loch Bracadale and reading to the end. I'm not going to read it through. That's their description of the current character. Do you accept that or not?
Yes, I would say that is very similar to the description that's in the SLA.
And do you accept the sentence where it goes, they say that there's a coastal character description, they say it's highly sensitive to wind farm development. Do you accept that categorisation of the character of Loch Bracadale?
I think it's at the higher end of sensitivity. Again, like the crofting landscape, we've identified that as being, or sort of the settled and farmed lowlands, we've identified that as being of high to stroke medium sensitivity. So yes, I would say that it's at the higher end. I don't think it's probably quite as high, but probably high stroke medium would be reasonable.
And then if you turn over the page to page 7, they talk about the steppe moorlands merging with the upper slope moorlands and the sharp contrast with the farm and settled lowlands. And they say that the interaction between these LCTs in this area results in the landscape with a highly distinctive scenic quality. Do you accept that?
Yes, that's one of the reasons why it's been included in the SLA.
And then I think you've already said in evidence in chief that you accepted their assessment of the Loch Bracadale's character under physical and characteristics and perceptual qualities that then follow.
Again, I think they're very similar to the SLA description.
Yeah, but if you'd answer my question, do you accept that they've accurately identified them?
Yes.
I mean, the reason I ask that, for instance, if you go to the last perceptual quality, it's visual containment afforded by the moorland landscape surrounding the coast, which provides a simple and unobtrusive backdrop to the more visually complex coast and fragmented island seascape. The proposed development is going to sit in that moorland landscape that's been described there, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Thank and then I won't ask you the remainder on that page. And then if we go to the next page, it's effect on the distinctive landscape character at the regional scale. And in the first paragraph, the development would be widely seen across the Loch Bracadale coast. Is there anything in that paragraph you disagree with?
Sorry, which paragraph?
So it's under the effect, page 8 now, effects of distinctive landscape character at the regional scale. And it begins the proposed development given its location. Again, it's just a description of the current. So I'd imagine you would accept that.
Yes.
Then it goes on in the next paragraph to say that the LCTs on the coastline of Loch Bracadale are inherently sensitive to the form of development proposed. Would you agree with that general statement of principle?
Again, I would say that some of those areas are at the higher end of sensitivity, but I think they're not necessarily all of high sensitivity.
No? Well, I'm not going to ask you. They then say, in the third paragraph, currently operational wind farms within this landscape do not intrude or dominate the smaller scale pockets of the coastal crofting communities. They don't interrupt the experience of Loch Bracadale. Do you agree that in respect to the current Ben Aketil and indeed Edinburgh?
Yes, I would agree.
Because we come back to a point of disagreement I was trying to identify between you and Mr. Daly. He sees a significant difference between the impact of the existing Ben Aketil turbines on the extent to which they have a significant impact on the surrounding landscape and particularly on Loch Bracadale. And that is entirely consistent with Nature Scott's approach, is it not?
Sorry, are you asking me if...
Yeah, that his view is consistent
that his view
with
is consistent with Nature Scott? Yes, it does appear to be.
And then the last full paragraph on that page, they say they note the existing Ben Aketil wind farm is already visible and noticeable, but it isn't generally a prominent feature in good light. Do you agree again with that assessment of the existing turbines?
I would actually disagree with that. I do think it is a prominent feature. I mean, I think turbines that are 100 metres high it is a prominent feature in the moorland landscape.
But in terms of its impact on on Loch Bracadale, you certainly wouldn't suggest it's anywhere close to being dominant, would you?
No, no.
Right, and now moving on to page 9, some of these points are similar, so I'm trying to I think I probably put enough to you from that on. For my purposes, just trying to see. Yes, can we turn to visual effects briefly, which is on page 12? And if you look at Loch Dunvegan, viewpoint 10, they say this, and they're commenting on an additional significant effect, which wasn't then apparent in your LVIA, but we've agreed it is now. The proposal would introduce large turbines seen directly above Dunvegan Castle, which forms a focus in the highly scenic views across the island-studded bay. Do you accept that Dunvegan Castle forms a view of the highly scenic views across the island-studded bay from viewpoint 10? A focus?
So you're asking me, is Dunvegan Castle a
focus in the
focus?
highly scenic views across the island-studded bay?
Well, I think it's visible, but I don't think it forms a focus. I think certainly the photography that we've taken, definitely with the sun catches it, it becomes a noticeable feature on the opposite side. But in a lot of lighting conditions, it's not particularly noticeable compared with the actual coastal qualities that are clearly apparent within Loch Dunvegan for all the lighting conditions. So I think that particular lighting condition picks it out as light does in those circumstances. But I think the coastal characteristics are a much more enduring quality.
And if you took the castle together with the designed landscape, which is primarily the woodland that surrounds it, irrespective of the light, that also is a focus in the views across the island-studded bay, is it not?
No, not really. I don't think you can really perceive that it's a design landscape from that distance.
You and Nature Scott obviously disagree about the impact on the scenic qualities of Dunvegan Castle. Just going to conclusions. I think there's nothing else in particular there that I need to put to you, because your position of disagreement with Nature Scott is clear. Thank you. That's all I wanted to ask you about CD 217. Can I then move on to methodology issues and to look at the we've touched on this in part, the difference between a restored baseline assessment and a comparative assessment. And what I wanted to deal with on there is the reasoning that lies behind it, and the document that I want to take you to is CD 620. And this is a consultation draft of a Nature Scott document looking at assessment of impact of repowered wind farms on nature. This draft being current at the time that the LVIA was being undertaken, as I understand it.
I would disagree with that.
Well, the consultation was over, but the draft, there had been when the LVIA was taken. Was there any further guidance on repowered wind farms?
This was never fully published by Nature Scott, and they certainly didn't refer to it in any of their scoping. So, no, I don't think that this was something that they were pursuing at the time.
Were you aware of it?
Yes, I was aware of it. I did go to some of those meetings when Nature Scott had to discuss repowering. So, yeah, I was involved in some of those discussions and conversations.
So, if we go to page 2 of this document, under the assessment baseline, it says, second paragraph, in order to assess the full impacts of a repowering proposal, the baseline for the EIA is the expected restored state of the site, excluding the existing turbines. Now, clearly advice has moved on that effectively you're being asked to do a comparative exercise. And then, as well, and 2 paragraphs below that, they say, notwithstanding our advice about the baseline, the current use of the site will also be a material consideration. It is therefore likely helpful to also present information which compares the full effect of the new proposal with the existing scheme. So that was the basis of their advice, and if we come to the reasoning behind that, that is to be found in Annex A, which begins at page 5. And it says this at the top of the page: an EIA should identify the full impacts of a new development proposal. The identification of likely significant effects should therefore not be based on appraising the difference between the existing wind farm and the new proposal. Do you not accept that as a matter of basic environmental impact assessment approach, if you're trying to assess the full impacts of a new development proposal, which will require the removal of an existing development, you should be looking at the restored baseline, at least a part of it, at the very least?
Just to clarify, this was not guidance by Nature Scott at the time when we carried out. You did say that in the beginning to this question.
I'm not asking you about the status. I'm asking you whether you agree with the reasoning in it. That's the important point.
Well, we have now carried out an assessment with the restored site, but no, I mean, the turbines are there and operational, and I think the most important, and as you say, material consideration is the existing site is there and that's operational. So I think we carried out the LVIA in a comparative assessment because that's frankly the most reasonable thing, that those turbines are already there in the baseline. That's already existing.
See, if you go to the fourth paragraph there, the alternative approach of including the existing developments in the assessment baseline would limit the EIA to a type of gap assessment, which only considers the additional effects of the new proposal and would fail to identify the full effects. As a matter of logic, isn't that entirely correct and accurate? Irrespective of who's saying it, isn't it accurate?
I can certainly understand the logic of it.
See, it goes on to say, 2 sentences on, the magnitude of additional effects may be quite small and insignificant, but the full effects of the new proposal on the environment will be very different and could be highly significant. Again, irrespective of who's saying it, that is a potential problem of just concentrating on a comparative assessment.
Well, I don't think so. I mean, I think in trying to deploy onshore wind, I think it's reasonable to consider that there are sites that already have existing turbines in them. So yes, I think we carried out an assessment on a reasonable basis in the LVIA, and again, equally, we've provided further information with regard to a restored assessment. I think both are relevant, but I do agree that the impacts of a comparative assessment are lesser than that of a restored, of the restored, and I think that's clear in my LVIA, where the assessment has increased the level of effects between the two. So again, I think both are valuable for the decision maker, and I think now that Nature Scott's advice has changed, we were more than happy to provide both of those assessments.
Well, there's no disagreement, and never has been, that they're both not material. But what I'm suggesting to you is on the basis of the reasoning on this page in particular, and it carries on, but I'm not going to go through it in detail, is that unless you have proper regard to the restored baseline, you run a real risk of failing to identify the full impacts.
Well, I mean, the turbines are already there in the existing baseline, so I think that is still incredibly relevant as the baseline.
I'm not suggesting to you it's not. I just said that if you didn't look at the restored baseline, you run a real risk of not identifying the full impacts, as the reasoning in this document outlines.
That was certainly not our view of the LVIA. It wasn't our intention to underassess the impacts, and I think.
Well, Thank you. I don't need to take that further. Can we then move on to a separate matter of methodology, which is the approach in your TA Appendix 6.1, which I think is CD, it'll be 1.7.
Sorry, just before we do that, if we take a 5-minute break.
Absolutely.
I said we would have a second break.
Yeah. So that can I ask whether you've yet received the updated or the proper version of CD 14.6?
I will check during the break if that's
That would
okay.
be very kind. Thank you.
Okay, so back at, well, let's say 28 minutes to 2.
Thank you, sir. We were coming to methodology and Appendix 6.1, which I think is a part of CD 1.7.
Yeah.
And I think this is a discussion you and I have had before at a previous inquiry, so I'll try and take it fairly swiftly. If one goes to your to the CD 1.7, I'm interested in assessment of primarily of visual effects, which begins at paragraph 25 on page 4. And your approach to assessment of visual effects is in two parts, as I understand it, or that in paragraph 31 you make the point that representative viewpoints are based on samples on which to make judgments. So you don't assess the significance or otherwise of impact at, say, for instance, viewpoint 10. What you do is you assess the significance, unless it's a particular viewpoint which is highlighted as something like the Queen's View on Loch Tummel or something like that. What you do is you assess, in a more descriptive sense, using viewpoints that may be relevant to any receptor group, whether the impact on that receptor group is significant or not.
Yes, that's correct.
And the second thing you do is, which you point out at paragraph 34, is that when you're assessing effects, you, and particularly magnitude of effects, as I understand it, or scale, my apologies on the scale, but is you take into account the full 360-degree view.
Yes, that's correct.
Now, that is in addition, as I understand it, to taking into account the proportion of the view that the development encompasses, because you take that in under paragraph 33.
Yes, so when we say we take in the full 360 degree of the viewpoint, that is understanding the full context of the view. So other elements that are in the view may well be important and relevant in understanding the impacts.
Yeah, I understand that, but those factors seem to be all set out in paragraph 33. Are you doing something additional in paragraph 34, or is that just a summary of what you've done in paragraph 33? Because paragraph 33 replicates GLVIA3, as I understand it, pretty well. Paragraph 34 doesn't, and isn't to be necessarily found in GLVIA3 in that form. I just want to understand whether you're doing something additional in paragraph 34 to what you set out in paragraph 33.
No, not necessarily additional, just being explicit about the way in which we carry out our assessments.
Because, as you'll be aware, the document which is hopefully just reached the reporters, CD 14.6, your approach to this, and I'm not suggesting to you that it's not an approach that you're entitled to take, because for reasons you point out by reference to the update to GLVIA3 in CD 6.2, in response to the question focused on receptor or viewpoint, you're given a latitude as to how to report.
Sorry, I don't have CD 14.6. I've got. Oh no, is that the Greystone?
No. Yeah.
No, wind farm.
There is a similar approach taken in the assessment at Greystone now, not surprisingly, because you were the author of that assessment.
Yes, it was part of our practice, yeah.
Yeah. And if you go to page 6, what Nature Scott said about, they were commenting on the difference of appreciation of extent of scale on visual receptors. And they say in the second sentence under effects on visual receptors, this partially reflects the method of assessment where representative viewpoints are assessed only for the scale of effect and used as proxies for surrounding receptors. That is an accurate description of what was done there and what is done here, is it not, at least in part?
Yes, that's correct.
Extent of receptors are area affected and duration of effect are factored into the assessment of magnitude. For extensive receptors such as roads and settlement, this averages out and lowers the magnitude of effect by comparison with a point or small area receptor. And then furthermore, the assessments of scale are based on a 360-degree view, which we've just been discussing, and the characterising effect of existing wind farms within this view. Now, Nature Scott appear to be saying that your approach, and it's just a matter for the reporter to be aware of if he agrees with it, is that it may average out the extent of impacts for a receptor group.
Well, that's what Nature Scott are saying, but again, as with Greystone and here, that is not the case of how we've carried that out, and I think that's clear as we've identified a significant effect on the A863, 63, and therefore it's not entirely the case. But so no, I don't think if you carry out that assessment, I don't agree with Nature Scott that will always happen. I think it is still really critical that when we undertake an LVIA that we stay focused on identifying where there is the potential for significant effects. But I think receptors that either are long, like a root receptor, is a different sort of assessment than, say, a point receptor or a receptor that's very small in nature. Okay. So I think it is different.
Okay, I hear what you say. I'm going to suggest there are two further matters on this. One is that I would imagine in most other LVIAs that the reporters had to deal with, it's easier to make the comparison to what both sides are saying, but whether they accept, if there's a finding of significant impact or otherwise at a viewpoint, because you can compare and contrast more easily. Is there any particular reason you don't make findings of significant impacts at viewpoints as well as doing receptor groups?
It's not necessary. I think our focus very much is on reporting to decision makers the impacts on the visual receptors, and viewpoints can often be not particularly representative of some of the receptors. They're usually positioned in locations where you get the greatest extent of views, and whilst that can be very useful and I think important, and I would agree that those are good locations for viewpoints, it can sometimes skew the assessment of the receptor and that gets lost. So I think the focus of the LVIA should very much be on the actual visual receptors. That is the point of the LVIA.
Well, I hear what you say again in respect to that, but having highlighted at the outset of this cross-examination the disagreements between you as to the extent, putting it broadly, of the extent of impacts between you and on the one side and Highland Council and indeed Nature Scott on the other side, might not in part be due to the approach you've taken, which we've just been discussing.
I don't think it is, no.
Just thank you. I don't think I need to ask you about that. Just so for your note, I referred quite briefly in passing to CD 6.2, and in fairness to the witness, the passage dealing with assessing viewpoints or visual receptors, which I think where my own friend Miss Wilson may have been going at one stage in evidence in chief, appears at page 18 under paragraph 6.7.
Apologies, I'm afraid you've lost me.
No, I wasn't. It's really just for the reporter, but the passage that you rely upon in the update to the GLVI.
Notes and clarifications, yes.
Is paragraph 6.7 on page 18, I think.
I don't know off the top of my head, but that does sound familiar.
Yeah. Can I then move on to an issue of design? And in the that is dealt with in a number of places, but I think in the best place to find it is in CD, I think it's 1.2, in the chapter on landscape and visual. And let me just see if I can get to the bit I want to get to. Give me a moment. Yeah, so it's 6.6, yes. Design and embodied mitigation. Yeah, design approach and mitigation. So it's electronic page 103 of CD 1.2, 6.4 in the document. 6.4, and the paragraph is design approach and mitigation begins at 6.6.6. And it's very similar, if not identical, wording as in the design and access statement. So it sets out 6.6.7 a number of key design principles. The fourth being minimizing impact on key views. What were the key views?
So in this part of Skye, key views are particularly those to the McLeod's tables and to up and along the coasts, down locks, down to the Coolins. So those are sort of key views and certainly the most valued parts of views in this area.
Because I don't think they're identified anywhere in the document, are they?
No, I don't think they are actually.
Because quite often said about design, and you've touched on it in chief, excuse me, in terms of overlapping, stacking and the like. In any development, even a single line, there will be an element, depending on where you're looking at it, of overlapping and stacking. But what developers or designers tend to do is try and design so that where appreciated from a key view or key viewpoint, you minimise the stacking, overlapping, which are seen as detractors in Nature Scott's design and guidance, for instance. But unless you know what those, and have identified what those key views are, it's quite difficult to test whether the design has achieved that objective. But from your answer, can I take it that the views from McLeod's tables are key views in that regard?
Yes, I mean there aren't that many fixed, static, specific views in the area where there's visibility of the turbines. Whereby, yes, quite often there are. We do try to minimise and optimise the design from very specific key views, particularly where people are static and visiting those viewpoints over and over again. Whereas, as you say, at a summit of a nearby hill. But I think for a lot of the receptors, they're moving through. There aren't. Again, if there had been visibility from, say, Dunvegan, then that might have been, because that's a sort of key settlement. But again, a lot of the receptors you're moving through rather than actually at one specific viewpoint for a time to actually appreciate the view. And again, I think in this way we were conscious that there are strong key views, particularly, as I say, to the McLeod's tables and to the Coolins and up and down locks, and we didn't want the turbines to interrupt those sort of key views, those valued views in the local landscape.
It's not just interrupting the key views, but it's the impact on the key views. And there'll be key views from Loch Bracadell, from what you've just said, because it's Hitton and Loch Dunvegan are the most important sea lochs in the vicinity of the wind farm, are they not?
Yes, those are the key.
Okay. I think I can make submissions on that. Then in 6.6.8, the design responds, and the first bullet point talks about maintaining continuity. And I think you touched on that in chief. You've resolved from continuity and gone on to similarity.
Yes, I have, yeah.
So we note that change. But in terms of one of the design, the current Ben Aketil design is a single line following a ridge. What you're proposing are two lines. The southernmost line, or the southern line of the two, doesn't follow a ridge like the northern line would do, does it?
No, it doesn't.
It also moves the proposal or the development or wind turbines materially closer to that, what I would describe as key sensitive interface between the moorland and the coast, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
Moving that closer can hardly be said to be mitigation, could it?
I've not indicated that particularly as mitigation, but I do believe that we have included adequate setback from those sensitive coastal areas.
And then, in the last bullet point in 6.6.8, you do talk about legibility of composition and stacking there. And you refer to McLeod's tables, other summits, the Store and Ben Edra, and two roads. Are those the locations from which the reporter should judge how successful you've been in dealing with legibility and stacking?
Those are certainly some of the areas that we've...
Do you want to put your microphone?
Thank you. Yes, those are certainly some of the sort of key locations where we did look at minimising the stacking. But I think but we've really reviewed all of the viewpoints, so it's not just those locations. I think it's important to minimise stacking in most of the locations, but yes, those that people do experience the wind farm from those routes and from some of those summits. As I said, there aren't a lot of sort of specific viewpoints where you are not moving through the landscape, and that's why, again, we've included those roads, because people do experience as you're travelling along those routes.
Right, I'm going to. Those are the matters of principle I want to ask you. I've just got to pick up a number of points, specific points on your report. Starting at 7.1.5.
Sorry, is this my inquiry report?
Yes. I understand in terms of farm and settled lowlands, you now accept a significant impact on the restored baseline. Which wasn't the position in the LVIA. What has changed? Has anything changed in the baseline to lead to a finding of significant impact on the farm and settled lowlands now that wasn't found before?
We did identify a significant effect in the LVIA on the farmed and settled lowlands.
My apologies, I may have missed that. Just give me a moment. Perhaps I'll come back to that. I wasn't sure that you had in the LVIA found a significant impact on farm and settled lowlands. But if you say you have, that's something we can check.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's what I've stated. That's what I think. I can go back and check.
Right. I'll move on from that. It's not a point that I'm proportionate to spend more time on. In 7.1.8, you say you're talking about the farm and settled lowlands, and you talk about the sharp contrast, or identify the sharp contrast between human activity and the surrounding large-scale landscapes. So that contrast exists within the LCT, and the proposed development would increase that contrast even more. The fact that the turbines will be much larger is that what leads to the increase in the contrast?
Yes, yeah, the scale of the turbines, yeah.
Okay. Um, 7.1.9, you deal with the low smooth moorland, and whether there be a significant impact within a 5-kilometre radius. You have identified significant impacts on upland sloping moorlands within the 5-kilometre radius, but not low smooth moorland. Is that because of your classification of the importance of the character type?
No, the sensitivity is quite similar, but as I've mentioned, when we talk about an extent or a radius, in this case, out to within a sort of maximum of 5 kilometres, that's not always uniform. And again, as I mentioned in my examination in chief, I do appreciate that Mr. Daly's identified a significant effect on part of the low smooth moorland within 5 kilometres, but again, quite a bit of that has their screening. So if you look at the areas of low smooth moorland that are nearest to the proposed development, there's quite a bit of screening in that area. And then I think, again, because you're on that sort of down slope facing towards the loch, away from the proposed development, and then as you move across on the other side of the valley, as it were, or kind of low area between the lochs, that's when there's a bit more visibility, but again, you're then more distant. And I note that even, certainly in parts of that, Mr. Daly doesn't consider that to be significant. So, yeah, it's part to do with extent. Again, I consider the extent to be quite much smaller in terms of effects, and that, again, reduces the magnitude of change that I've assessed.
Suggest to you that there's an inconsistency there, but I'll ask Mr. Daly to comment on that. In 7.1.11, you say that the landscape impacts are considered to be localised in extent. If you take into account the seascape impacts, right?
Sorry to stop you in your flow. What was the reference? Sorry.
7.1.11.
Okay.
You say landscape impacts are considered to be localised. If you take into account what Mr. Daly has assessed under the seascape impacts, can you really suggesting that as a matter of common sense that the impact on Loch Brachadale could be considered to be localised?
Yes, I do. Yep.
Right, well, you can comment on that. So would you give me a moment? So thank you very much. Those are all my questions. In order to be of assistance to you, so I've finished slightly sooner than I intended, so I hope I haven't caught Mr. Campbell by surprise.
Mr. Campbell, do you want to start just now, or do you want to take a short break, or do you want to leave it till tomorrow morning?
I'm not quite sure what your intentions are for the rest of the day, but you did.
Well, I was going to run till 2:30, and I imagine everyone's quite anxious to get to lunch by this stage. But if you prefer to wait till tomorrow morning,
I think my difficulty is this: I can certainly start now, but a lot of what's been taken from the witness, who must by now be quite tired, I suspect.
Yeah.
From my learned friend, Mr. Finlay, were questions I was going to ask.
Right. Okay.
So rather than repeat them and bore you to death, I would prefer to have more time to shorten the cross-examination.
Okay.
But I don't think I can do that in 25 minutes.
All right. No, that's fine. Well, what I suggest then, since it's been a long day already, and we're going to have the evening session, is that we adjourn now, and resume at 6:30 for the evening session, and then resume this cross-examination tomorrow morning, if that's acceptable to everyone. Yeah.
Yes. There's the added point that I have to make sure that the evening session will run smoothly for you, so I need an hour to do that. Okay. This afternoon.
In what sense do you know?
Well, if we were to go on after 2:30 with my cross-examination, then I wouldn't have that time.
Oh, yeah, I see what you mean. Yes. No. What I suggest is we adjourn now. Yeah.
I think it's better, since you're not allowing questions, except your own, of course, from the witnesses this evening. I think 9 o'clock is probably pessimistic. I think we should finish
Right.
well before that.
I don't think it said no questions, but I think it's a hearing. It's a hearing situation in which any questions. I might have questions. So.
Well, I don't know if my learned friend Miss Wilson will have questions for these witnesses or not.
No.
Right. We'll see what happens. Thank you.
So we'll adjourn now, and we'll resume at 6:30 for the evening session. We'll resume this cross-examination tomorrow. Ms. Anderson, you're a professional witness. You know what the score. You can't discuss the case with your instructing. Yeah. Okay. Grand. So I'll see you tonight at 6:30. Thanks very much, everyone.